Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. All right, folks, Big Paul here today with another muscle rant. I want to talk about something today that drives me nuts. This is what these muscle rants are for. Gym bro stuff that drives me nuts. And that is the notion that always advancing your weights is equivalent to gaining more muscle. That's not always true. And I'm going to explain to you why constantly chasing the logbook in PRs may actually be costing you gains and causing more problems with your gym progress. Now, that's not to say we don't want to advance weights and progressive overload isn't a thing. There's some nuance to this, and I'm going to explain all of it to you in just 1 second. All right, before we get started, I want to remind you guys about the Team Anabolic Bodybuilding members site on School. It's $30 a month. It's not that expensive. It's a place where you can ask me questions, and especially given the environment we're in now with censorship, you never know when my content's going to be gone. It's a place where you can go to communicate with other members, and I will directly answer questions. I post exclusive content, discounts, whatever. Team Anabolic Bodybuilding School site. It is linked in the video description below. Go check it out. All right, now on to the muscle rant. Justin Harris had a video up today on Instagram. It was a reel talking about why increasing your weights doesn't always translate into gains. And I actually had this on my list to make today. It was ironic that he put something up at the same time that I did. I guess it was on both of our minds. Maybe we had talked about it in a previous podcast. I don't know. But it's something that I have talked about before, and I wanted to elaborate my thoughts on. And why chasing the logbook and trying to set PRs doesn't always mean that you're getting bigger and promoting hypertrophy.
The important thing to remember with progressive overload is you're not just moving more weight through space. You want to move more weight because the muscle gets stronger. It's very easy to change the form on a movement, like on squats. It's easier to widen your stance, put the bar lower on your back, sit back further, wear flat shoes, wrap your knees tighter, wear a belt tighter, rest longer between sets. All those things would let you lift more weights. Your quads aren't actually getting stronger. The movement is just a tool to make the muscle stronger. Getting stronger in the movement isn't the goal. Making the muscle stronger is the goal.
You'll see tons of videos of elite pro bodybuilders. Nick Walker, I made a video about him the other week. He doesn't lift super heavy. Sean Clarita, seen videos of him. I mean, he lifts pretty heavy. But what these guys do is they have controlled form. And there is a point to this controlled form when it comes to hypertrophy. I'm not disputing that mechanical tension is a primary driver of hypertrophy. What I am disputing is that advancing your weights doesn't always equate to more or better mechanical tension. What you see a lot of times is that dudes just get better at leveraging the weight, cheating, or maybe not even cheating in technical terms as far as powerlifting goes. They just get better at technique. They aren't actually placing additional load, tension on the muscle that they're trying to target. You'll see it all the time with powerlifters. Powerlifters don't really have giant quads like a bodybuilder does. They just don't. You see it all the time. And I have my thoughts on this. And it's funny because Justin talked about it today and he elucidated exactly what I was thinking about. Guys that are incredibly proficient at squatting, they get really good at their technique over time. You'll see it with powerlifters. They widen their stance. They get their foot placement in a certain way. They understand how to get the bar lower on their back. They change the leverage points. They get better at moving the weight from point A to B, but they're not actually placing more load on their quadriceps. And that's not the goal in powerlifting. The goal in powerlifting is to get the weight from point A to point B in the most efficient pattern possible, most efficient fashion possible. That's not the goal in bodybuilding. The goal in bodybuilding is we want to place the most load on that muscle to elicit mechanical tension, thus hypertrophy as a result. And that often means placing ourselves in a disadvantageous position when it comes to leverage. We want to actually place more leverage on the muscle and reduce the efficiency of the lift. Powerlifters do other things too, like wearing knee wraps. When your weight goes up 50 pounds from wearing knee wraps, you didn't get stronger. You've just created more leverage with the knee wraps. You've created a pressure on the knees and made it easier to get the weight up from point A to point B. That doesn't necessarily mean more mechanical tension on the muscle. You'll see it with bench presses. The arch that you get on a bench press, the leverage of the movement, how they move in an arc pattern that may not be the greatest for pec development. Powerlifters often have big triceps, big front delts, and that's because when they lift on a bench press, the technique that they use seems to place more tension on front delt and triceps. You don't see powerlifters with huge chests that often. It does happen. Same thing with the quads. You don't see powerlifters with huge quads. Deadlifts is another one. And I'm probably going to upset some people when I say this, but doing a sumo deadlift isn't exactly the best for placing more mechanical tension. It is a way to be more efficient with the lift. I'm not saying that there's something fundamentally wrong with sumo deadlifts if your goal is to move weight from point A to point B. But if you're a bodybuilder, our goal is not to move that weight from point A to point B. It is to increase mechanical tension. And that is the key component that a lot of guys miss. And this is why chasing the logbook becomes dangerous sometimes. Now think about it. With a dumbbell curl or a lateral raise with the dumbbells, how far are you going to take beating PRs? Are you going to be doing lateral raises with the 80-pound dumbbells and have massive delts? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't see that happening. I have pretty big delts, and I never use more than a 35-pound dumbbell on lateral raises, ever. I have 20-plus inch arms, and I rarely curl more than a 40-pound dumbbell when I'm doing dumbbell curls. I don't even do squats anymore. Most bodybuilders you see eventually just give up on free weight squats because they often aren't the best movement for stimulating quad growth. Now, if you're a short, squatty guy, like a Tom Platz build, sure, they can be great. But when you're tall like me or somebody like Chris Bumstead, maybe not. Maybe a hack squat is the better movement where you're actually placing more mechanical tension on the quadricep than you are on a squat, a traditional barbell squat, for example. So exercise selection is important. Now, with this said, once we figure out the kung fu of form, this is something that I've learned as I've gotten older, and I've had to be much more diligent with as an aging bodybuilder. This is a lesson that I've had to learn the hard way. I was obsessed with the logbook when I was younger. And I do think there is a time and place in bodybuilding where you need to progress your weights, you need to get stronger, and you need to move up your PRs on certain big compound movements. This comes with an important caveat within the constraints of good, consistent form. I used to work with Dante Trudell. Dante was my trainer for many years when I was younger, and I think this is where a lot of people get confused about HIIT training. It's not always the logbook. It's moving the logbook within the constraints of perfect form. Dante was a stickler for perfect form. Your negative and your positive needed to be exactly the same on each movement. Your movement pattern needed to be locked in and actually stimulating the muscle that you're trying to grow. It wasn't just about getting the weight from point A to point B. It was about advancing the weight within the constraints of hypertrophy. And this is an area I think that a lot of young bodybuilders get confused in. They can't decide if they are a powerlifter or if they are a bodybuilder. And you need to choose at some point what you are. If you want to be a bodybuilder, you need to start perfecting your form and lifting like a bodybuilder. If you want to be a powerlifter, you need to work on perfecting your form for powerlifting, for moving weights from point A to point B. If you're going to be a bodybuilder, you need to work on perfecting your form to create the most advantageous position for mechanical tension on the targeted muscle. You know, if you're heaving and swinging the weights, like something like a dumbbell curl. I see a lot of young guys in the gym. I'll be doing dumbbell curls with 35s. And I'll see some swizzle stick roll up next to me that's 165 pounds, and he picks up the 50-pound dumbbells. I don't know if he's trying to impress me or what's going on. I was probably that dude at some point, trying to impress the big guy. And all I see is weights being swung and heaved around, and very little tension actually being placed on the bicep. It ends up being a front delt movement. You're doing front raises. Or you're just using momentum. You're swinging and moving the weights. Everybody likes to cite the example of their favorite bodybuilder that had crappy form on exercises. We all know the guys that had crappy form. There was a couple of them. They're exceptions. Those guys would have likely grown no matter what they did. And clearly what they did worked for them, but that does not mean that it works for you. This is another area where people make a huge mistake. They look at outliers. They look at that guy, that one guy in 1,000 that can get away with something. And they point to him, well, he did it. It must work for me. You have to understand that bro is a statistical anomaly. There is a 1 in 1,000 chance that you're that guy, or maybe even higher. So you need to construct your program, your strategy to be what the average is. Now, if you are an outlier, you happen to be that one in however many thousand, you can adjust for that later. Another thing too, as you age as a bodybuilder, this is another thing that I've seen. The guys that have crappy form, that are just moving weights from point A to point B, heaving weights around, they very rarely last past 40. Almost never. Very rarely. They fall apart eventually. They end up injured. They end up tearing things. They end up having joint and connective tissue problems. I can think of a couple pro bodybuilders that have basically crippled themselves from having crappy form. If you want to preserve and extend your career, that's another thing to consider. And this is something that I've had to work hard at as an aging bodybuilder. If I want to progress and get bigger, I have to be very intelligent with how I lift. I have to live to lift another day, and I have to get the most out of the least when I lift. I have to make sure that that lift that I am doing is perfect to place the most amount of mechanical tension on the muscle with the least amount of weight. Now, I'm not saying that I shouldn't advance weights. I do advance weights. I push weights up when it's appropriate, mostly on big compound movements, something like leg press, hack squats, presses. I'm also limited on presses because of my shoulder injuries. I can't really get super aggressive with pushing the weights up. So I have to really focus on getting a good squeeze, putting myself in a mechanically advantaged position where I can get the most out of that lift without heaving huge amounts of weight around. On auxiliary exercises, I make sure that my form is perfect and get the most out of those. And that's how you extend your lifting career and create maximum hypertrophy. Now, when you're younger, you're 19 years old, you're 22, 23, 24, by all means, go for advancing your weights and beating the logbook. You can get away with it then. I could get away with playing backyard tackle football when I was in my 20s. I couldn't do that now. So, long story short here, summarizing all of this, figure out what you want to be. If you want to be a bodybuilder, you need to learn how to lift like a bodybuilder. If you want to be a powerlifter, learn how to lift like a powerlifter. If you're trying to do both, you're probably not going to be very good at either one of them. All right, folks, that's all I got for you on this one. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Thank you for each and every one of you. I appreciate your support. You mean a lot to me. Thank you. For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.